Hey guys, Joan Ribs here. Coming at you with another daily Spireside chat. Today I want to tackle one of the larger questions in Slay the Spire, which is how good are elite fights? It's a very difficult question to answer because there are just so many different variables involved, and as you go through a run, whether you should take an elite fight or not will change based on how good your deck is, how much HP you have, how the act is laid out, um, whether your deck is specifically able to fight the 3 different elites that you could be fighting, or maybe 2 different elites that you could be fighting. You cannot fight the elite that you fought last, so the first elite fight of an act could be any of the 3 elites for that act, and then the subsequent ones could be either of the 2 that you didn't just fight. How many potions you have on your belt. Whether you should take an elite fight is constantly a question you should be asking yourself, and will change all the time depending on all sorts of stuff. But I just wanted a baseline. I wanted to come up with a baseline of how highly I valued elites, because I know that I value elites quite highly. I go after, on average, 2 or more elites per act as silent in Ascension 15. And so yeah, I know that I value them highly. I wanted to try to quantify how highly and why I value them highly so that other people can sort of see inside my head and see what I'm thinking and understand why I would choose to fight an elite over not choose to fight an elite. So, first things first, let's look at what the rewards for elites are. That's this one. There you go. How good are elite fights? These are the best production values that you've ever seen. I know. You don't have to comment on that. I know that these are the best production values you've ever seen. Thank you for sharing in advance. I already knew, though. Thank you, though. How good are elite fights? Compared to a campfire upgrade, pessimistically, we get a Relic, which I value at 1.6 upgrades. I'll tell you why soon. Gold, which I value at 0.2 upgrades, and a card choice, which I value at 0.2 upgrades, although that changes a ton. Earlier in the game, it's more valuable. Later in the game, it's less valuable. So in total, compared to a campfire upgrade, pessimistically, I think that elite fights are about twice as valuable, assuming you can beat them. Now, we'll get into how I evaluated relics after I say the main points. So I think that getting an elite killed is very valuable, clearly. 2 campfire upgrades. A campfire upgrade is one of the gold standards in this game. It's something which is incredibly reliable. You know exactly how valuable it's going to be going into the campfire, and campfire upgrades are strong enough for sure to beat the game on non-Ascension, and prioritizing campfire upgrades can beat you the game on Ascension 15 too. But I do not think prioritizing campfire upgrades over elite fights is a sensible way to win Ascension 15 as much as possible. I think if you look at the numbers here, it's very clear that elite fights are considerably more impactful to the strength of your deck than campfire upgrades. And the question then comes down to how much gold can I afford to lose to take elite fights. So if I'm sitting with a deck in Act 1 and I know that on average I'll take 20 to 30 damage in this elite fight, and I'm fighting against Slime Boss at the end of the act, that's probably going to cost me a rest. So I get 2 campfire upgrades worth of elite fight, and then I rest, so net I'm like 1 campfire upgrade up, sort of. So generally, even in the worst situations where elite fights are costing me a lot of health, if I can get elite fights and campfires on the same path, I'm going to prioritize elite fights in Act 1. The other thing to mention in this evaluation is that the value of an elite fight is subject to variance, much more so than the value of a campfire upgrade. If I walk into a campfire, I know that I have a card that I can upgrade, and so, it might not be the best card ever. I might only be upgrading something for +4 damage or +4 AoE damage or something like that, which isn't as good as, say, upgrading a footwork might be. But regardless, as I walk into the campfire, I know that I'm getting positive value. If I walk into an elite fight, I might get really unlucky and die. That would be the worst thing possible. But the more likely way that I'm going to get unlucky is I'm going to beat the elite fight and get a relic which isn't good, and not get a great card choice, so I skip the card choice, and all of a sudden I've taken damage for very little value. So there's a huge, massive field of game theory involving game trees and stuff, which you can look at an expected value to plug numbers in and try to work out how you want to manage that variance. Typically, in my experience, my Ascension 15 win rates are not above 70% on either character, which means that the variance just isn't that significant. If I lose to variance, like, whatever, I lose all the time. So, having some of those losses be to variance when I'm pursuing what I believe to be the strongest strategy on average is not very significant to me, because pursuing the strongest strategy on average is going to be significantly more relevant than the few losses I get to variance. If I had like a 99% win rate, then I could start to think about getting rid of that variance. And, you know, maybe if I had a 99% win rate, then a significant amount of my losses were going to be because I was pursuing paths which had more variance than other paths. But with a 70% win rate, the variance is not very significant to me. There are times when it does become a thing. Like if I'm about to go into an act boss fight and I have either an elite or a campfire, and I know that I can go to the campfire and upgrade a certain card in my deck and that will be enough to beat the act boss, then sure, I will likely do that instead of the elite fight. But navigationally, elite fights are on aggregate higher value than campfires in Ascension 15, assuming that you can beat them, in my opinion. Okay, let's talk about relics, because relics are really interesting, and it's really hard to work out because there are 69 different relics you can get from elite fights as silent. It's really hard to work out how valuable those are, right? So what I did to get a decent idea of that is I looked at all of the relics, and these are my numbers on the relics, how many wins I have, how many times I've gotten them, and my win percentage. Shout out to Mercury Hourglass, which is somehow 86%. That relic's insane. Shout out to the Courier, which is, this is called variance. The Courier has an 86% win rate for me on Ascension 15 for some reason. Yeah, I mean, these win rates are, like, the numbers aren't large enough on these to have actually good numbers. They're still subject very much to variance. But what's more interesting in this spreadsheet is I took all the relics, I looked at their rarities and weighted them accordingly. So common relics are about 3 times as likely as rare relics, and uncommon relics are about in between. And I looked at what they did and weighted it accordingly. So I tried to do this very pessimistically. Anchor, for example, gives you 10 block on the first turn of combat. A lot of the time you don't actually get attacked on the first turn of combat. Even if you are getting attacked, you may be able to block the incoming damage anyway. So I valued it at 5 block, which weighted for a common relic gives you 7.5 block. I also didn't really consider elements of relics which, you know, really shone when used to the best of their ability. Like Kunai, I said, averaged 20 block per fight, which honestly, that might even be a little bit optimistic for short hallway fights, but if you consider an endgame fight against an act boss or something, Kunai can easily make you hundreds of block in that fight and win you the run. So I was more thinking about, like, somewhat pessimistically how they operated in a deck that doesn't use them that well in fights which are not that good for them. Another example would be Birdface Stern. I evaluated that at 5 heal per fight, so if you have 2.5 powers in your deck, but often Birdface Stern is giving you like 12 or 14 HP per fight, because silent powers are good, especially since Awakened One was nerfed, and, you know, you put them in the deck if you have Birdface Stern, because now they heal you for 2 health. Yeah, in general, I tried to be pretty pessimistic with how I valued these. And like sum up all the relics, divide by the sum of the weights, and you get an analysis of what I think on average a relic from an elite does in every fight. So I think it gives about 2 block on average. It gives about 0.3 card choices per run, which is a very weird metric, and basically I didn't value those very highly at all. But if you think about something like Prayer Wheel or Question Card, those give you more looks at cards, and that has some value. Like I said, I didn't value that very highly. Relics draw you about 0.25 cards on average, which is great. I think drawing an extra card in a combat is worth an upgrade typically. They deal about 2 extra damage per combat. That's for like shorter fights, and I mean 2 damage per combat, that's like worth half an upgrade or something. It's pretty good. Give you about an extra 1/6 of an energy per fight, which is fine. I think an upgrade for 1 energy in a fight is okay. It's not like the most exciting thing, but I think that's fine. Heal you for about a quarter of a health per fight. You get about a quarter of a health per fight heal from an average relic, which I had no idea how to really evaluate this versus campfire upgrades. The only thing I can think of is if you buy bandage up and decide whether or not to upgrade it. Often you're going to, especially on Silent, who struggles with healing. Getting the sustain seems somewhat valuable. So I thought that a campfire upgrade was probably worth 3 healing per fight. So that's about 1/10 of a campfire upgrade, just that value there. They give you about 0.6 max HP. They're worth about an extra 0.06 relics. That's stuff like Matryoshka or a Chinese chest or old coin. That's how I evaluated stuff like that. And they give you about 0.18 upgrades on average. That's all the like toxic egg, frozen egg, whetstone, and warpaint. I actually valued yeah. So overall, if you sum that all up, I get that this is worth about 1.56 campfire upgrades. So I rounded that up to 1.6. And that's significant. And it's nice to look at this and see vaguely what relics are doing in your deck. They help with, block damage, card draw, energy, a decent amount. If you get like 4 relics out of the first act, you're on average getting 8 block and 8 damage per fight, which is incredible. Yeah, cool. So multiplied that by 1.25 for the extra gold value and card value to get the idea of essentially being worth 2 campfire upgrades. So, spreadsheets. Welcome inside my head. This is a game that is impossible to, fully solve. So, if we were to tackle this with AI stuff, you could put some sort of neural network to work on the game, and it could start, simulating through game trees and working stuff out and finding the highest potential lines through the game. From this situation, what actions will be most likely to win for me? And it would take a lot of computing power and a lot of time for even a neural network to get super good ideas about this game, because the game is just so complicated. You're talking about, many layers of individual fights, which by themselves would be somewhat complicated for a neural network to work its way through. And that is paired with a strategic layer where you're having to go through different nodes. So this is a very, very, very difficult game to calculate for, but we still have to calculate. We still have to be able to say, this path is better than that path, and come up with a reason. And there are a few ways to do that. One is to start with assumptions and just go from there. So you can start with the assumption that I want to reduce variance and that I can win the game if I get campfire upgrades, and conclude campfire upgrades are a good strategy. And if you have those assumptions and those are true, then your logic is probably pretty much great there. But the problem is your assumptions, right? They may not actually have a good basis. They may be flawed. You're just pulling them out of thin air. They're just appearing. Another way to analyze stuff like this is to look at data from what has happened in the past. There are all sorts of problems with that. So, a problem if you're looking at everyone's data in aggregate is that a lot of the time people aren't really playing as hard as possible to win. A lot of people are playing differently from other people who are playing differently from other people. No players all play the same way. There are a lot of people who are making mistakes in one run that they might not make in another run, and that another person definitely wouldn't make in that run. Or there are people who are playing better than you, who are making fewer mistakes than you are. And so data, while it's cool to look at, and data can be used descriptively for this game very well, like you can draw beautiful graphs of like, this is the win rate of this relic and stuff, and you look at it and it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. But using the data inferentially to actually say something is much more difficult in this game. So I can look at data, I can look at this data about relics here and see like old coin has a 78% win rate. But there are all sorts of problems with this. So like, one, my sample size isn't big enough. I only have 18 samples of playing with old coin. Realistically, having or not having one relic for a run doesn't make that big a deal unless it's like Dead Branch or Shuriken or Kunai. And so, like, having or not having old coin isn't actually going to change my win rate very much from what the normal win rate is. If the normal win rate is 65% for me on Silent, maybe, then having old coin, it would be insane for it to make my win rate more than like 67% or something. So it just like there's no signal in this data. That's one issue. Two, the data is terrible. Like, where do I get old coin? I get it from fights in Act 2 or something. Well, if I've made it to Act 2, I'm already, winning the run 75% of the time now, because we've already passed by all the times that we would have died. So the data is terrible there. You'd have to adjust for that somehow. 3, the data is dependent on how I use old coin. I believe that the gold from old coin should be spent in a certain way, and I go to stores and spend it that way or whatever. But maybe I'm wrong, right? That could be wrong. For Dead Branch, the data is dependent on how I use Dead Branch. Do I put a bunch of infinite blades and after images in my deck to try to make Dead Branch really good? Do I avoid cards which exhaust when I have Dead Branch and try to only have a few of them maybe because I don't want to bloat my deck, which is doing something strong by itself already? These questions about how the pilot actually uses the relic will influence how valuable it is for win rate. So data for this game exists, and there's a ton of it, and I believe that the developers look at it somewhat for balancing the game, which makes sense in some ways if like a goal of the developers is to have all of the cards be picked a relatively frequent amount of the time. Then if they look at a card and see, oh, it gets picked only 1 out of 500 times it's offered, we should change it. That makes perfect sense. For sure, that's a way that they can use descriptive statistics to see if they're reaching a design goal for the game. But yeah, it's really hard to use data inferentially to help with this decision. So we can't really use an AI to do this. It doesn't exist, and it would take a really long time or whatever. We cannot really use heuristics to do this because we don't know if our heuristics are right. Presumably they're wrong. How could they possibly be right? We just created them out of thin air. Like, this is an incredibly complex puzzle, and we're just like creating a thing from thin air and saying, I believe this is right. Like, no, it's not. It's not right. We can't use data inferentially. So this is an approach that I basically know this approach from playing games competitively and competing at them at the highest level, and this tries to blend like data and prior beliefs about things and computation. So we try to leverage all 3 of these mechanisms to try to get a decent idea. So I'm giving basically heuristic beliefs about how valuable these relics are. I haven't actually looked at data, and if I did look at data, it would be sort of garbage anyway. Like, it would be really hard to get signal out of the data for all the reasons that I've been saying about how data is descriptive instead of inferential for this game. So I am populating this with heuristics based on the rule set of the game and my experience playing with the relics. I'm calculating weights and stuff and averaging things and making best guesses about the value versus upgrade. And yeah, I'm coming up with this idea of how strong a relic is. And add that to, comparing it to something that I can anchor against in the game. Because it's really important to have something that you actually anchor value against in a game. For example, in chess, rather than saying white is 72% likely to win right now when you're analyzing a position, you say, like, white is ahead by 0.75 pawns right now. And that doesn't translate to percentage chance for white to win, which might be an interesting thing to say for other reasons. But it translates to something that you can actually create an anchored weight for in the game rule set. So you have some idea, oh yeah, pawn is worth about that much based on my experience playing. I sort of understand what's going on here. So we're comparing to a campfire upgrade, which I think generally you have some idea of what that's worth. It's also important to note that a campfire upgrade changes in value depending on situations in the game. So you'll also be able to say, well, this elite fight's maybe worth 2 campfire upgrades on average, but the fact that I'm taking damage from it here is pretty bad, and I have a particularly good campfire upgrade, so in this situation, the campfire does seem better to me. It's important to be able to be flexible and thinking like that. Yeah. And you end up with this. So, welcome to my head. Sorry about that. I hope you've enjoyed this chat. I think some people really, really enjoy this stuff, and some people just like flip the switch off when I start talking in this way. So I hope that some of you have really enjoyed it. This is the most effective way that I have found to analyze a game like this and come up with reasonable ideas which help me play it better. And so I wanted to share exactly how I came to this conclusion, which is that elite fights are better than campfire upgrades, usually, unless you really value the health a lot. And you have to be thinking about how much the health is valued, right? Or unless you really don't want to maximize variance, like if you already have a deck that can kill the Act 3 boss and you figure, oh, an elite fight has like a 1% chance to kill me if I get really unlucky. Maybe I won't go to the elite fight then. Yeah. Or if, yeah. or if. It's a very, very difficult game. It's hard to work out how to path, for sure. But this is a way to think about the value of elite fights, and you can use the same method to think about how much do I value events, how much do I value hallway fights, stuff like that, and come up with a malleable way of valuing different things. This is, if you can start to think about things in terms of how they're valuable related to each other, you can start to apply things to decisions like, do I trade in my boss relic for a random starting relic in this situation? If you look at the map and see that a good boss relic will let you take 4 elite fights, and you with a good boss relic, you expect not to take too much damage from them, then all of a sudden you have a more reasonable metric for evaluating how big a deal is that actually, and you can look at how likely it is to get a better boss relic and start to make decisions from there. So I could analyze this game for the next 6 months and not really get bored. I should probably end the video though right now. Thank you very much for tuning in. I have links to my Discord, my Twitch channel and stuff below the video if you want to drop by and say hi, watch the show live. Discord is just active all the time. If I'm awake, I'm probably there and available if you want to chat with me or with other people who watch my stuff, talk about games, talk about articles, stuff like that is what we do. Spam emotes of birds. I don't know. And I do have a link to my Patreon below the video too, if you want to support my YouTube content creation in particular. This is something that I'm going to strive to do every day forever. Content creation is my job, and I would love for YouTube to be a complement to my Twitch content creation. So I'm going to experiment a bit with what sort of stuff works here and what doesn't. But in general, I want to make a video every day for YouTube. So, compared to my Twitch content, that means that I'm not interacting with the audience It means that I'm more focused on creating compressed information so that this is worth somebody's time to watch just to consume, whereas Twitch chat is often, or Twitch videos are often worth people's time as a second monitor sort of thing to hang out and watch, or worth somebody's time to hang out and chat. This is more focused content is the idea. I gotta stop talking. Thanks everybody for watching this video, and I'll see you tomorrow for another daily Spire side chat. Alright, bye-bye.